Chapter 3. I ran, forever it seemed, past houses like the one I'd escaped. Dogs chained or fenced barked in greeting or in warning. A porch light came on, and there was my shadow racing just ahead of me. A man on the porch yelled, "Hey!" I kept on running, away from those big houses and clean streets, into the darker end of that town where my blackness would blend in. There was so much to sniff there that I had to slow down. Cat, rat, paper that smelled like food, dog everywhere. I'd never been so excited or so scared. At last I found a corner of a vacant lot to lie down in. My belly knotted with hunger. There I spent a fitful night, no dreams of home to ease my slumber. I'd drop off, then wake up with a start thinking I'd heard something. A big black truck with a rackety engine, Penelope calling, "Blackie, Blackie!" The click of a glass door shutting me in. Morning came and I hit the streets again, trying my best to look as if I had something to do, a place to go. I guess I thought if it went far enough, looked hard enough, after a little while, a day or two maybe, I'd find Bob. He'd recognize me by the white spot on the tip of my tail, and he'd see right away that I didn't have a home. What could he do but take me back? The town was starting to wake itself up, shopkeepers sweeping their sidewalks, bread trucks and milk trucks and meat trucks passing like empty promises. To get my mind off food, I ran alongside a boy delivering newspapers until the boy got nosy. "Hey, you're a stray, aren't you?" He stopped his bike, but by the time he'd set that bike down, I was gone. It was a bacon morning. Out of every window, the delicious odor of pig meat frying. I could hardly stand it. By the time I found breakfast, half a hamburger and a tipped over garbage can, I was so hungry I almost ate the paper it came in. I didn't tip the can, by the way. I could still imagine the scolding I'd get from Mom if she caught me. I didn't dare think how life would be if I never saw my mom again. At every house, people were up and going places, getting into cars, and going off with big, important things to do. Kids jumped on their bikes or climbed onto school buses, leaving the houses empty and quiet. Or a dog would stay behind to mind things. The cats didn't help. Cats have very little use for people, no matter how they might pretend otherwise. But the dogs always watched the people's every move, afraid they'd never come back. I made a few friends among the mixed breeds. One let me drink from her personal water bowl. I think she wanted me to stick around, but no way was I going to end up chained to a house again. Not in this life. I sniffed my way across town, then through a big, empty park, and at last ran smack into a highway, cars flying back and forth faster than old Dex on his best day. I was trying to decide which way to go when I caught the distinct scent of something rank and woolly. I lifted my nose, sniffed again. Sheep? Sheep! The smell, terrible but wonderful for what it promised, drifted toward me. My heart lifted and I raced in the direction of the smell. Bob! It had to be Bob! They appeared like a funny kind of dream, a white blur, jingling and jangling like Christmas. The closer they came, the slower I went. These weren't sheep. They looked sort of like sheep. They smelled sort of like sheep, but they sure weren't sheep. The look in their weird yellow eyes, for one thing. They were harnessed all together in a long line, pulling a wagon with a little red house that sort of sat sideways on top. "Ho!" said the man walking beside the wagon. "Ho, you mangy varmints!" The goats came to a jangling stop, snorting and fussing. "Hey, fella!" said the man, his hand laid flat so that I could sniff its trustworthiness. I was less careful in those days than I've learned to be, and a lot more lonely. One sniff, and I was all over him, telling him my many troubles. "Well, yes," the goat man said. "Sure, danged if it isn't so." Things like that to let me know he understood. The goat man had the longest beard, gray and curly. It hung halfway down a ratty old jacket that might have been yellow once. On his head was a floppy brown hat, stained with sweat and tied under his chin with a string. Between the hat and the beard were the eyes the color of the sky above Bob and Ellen's ranch, just as clear and bright blue. The goats were a whole lot less friendly. They shuffled around impatiently while the goat man and I got to know each other. Then, while they grazed on the grass alongside the highway, the goat man poured me a bowl of goat's milk, thick and tangy. I lapped it up like it came from my mother. "That should hold you for a while," the goat man said. "A growing pup needs sustenance." I figured sustenance was another name for the milk, but he meant more than that. He meant love and hope and that sort of thing. He knew what I needed all right. I needed a home. Watching the goat man put away the bowl and the jug of milk, I knew I wanted to stay with him. There were things he could teach me, and I could help with the goats. But would he take me with him? Would he want another hungry belly to feed? The goat man got up from the rock he was resting on. He never rested long. "On, you huskies!" he cried, and those goats, with only a little bit of grumbling, started moving, pulling that funny red wagon house on its creaky wooden wheels. I followed along like I'd followed old Dex, as if I'd always been part of the team. "You're a good pup, Shep," the goat man said after a while. "I don't know where your folks are, or I'd take you there. I guess you'll have to hitch up with us. We've come all the way up from Mexico, and we're headed for Canada. That okay, boy?" You can bet I told him in every way I could, mostly with my tail, that it was. Mexico? Canada? What did I know? We traveled right alongside the highway as the cars whizzed by. The goat man waved at the people in the cars, and when the children waved back, the goat man's eyes would sparkle. I guessed that his mouth was smiling under all that beard. We walked in sunlight as long as it lasted, and then by moonlight when the sun was gone. I got used to the jingling bells after a while, but the goats wouldn't let me anywhere near them. They'd kick or butt me if I tried to get close. This just made the goat man laugh. That night, my first night on the team, we went a little off the highway to camp. The goats plopped down in the weeds right where they were. Then the goat man cooked us some goat's meat, I'll spare you the particulars, over an open fire, turning it on a stick. Did that ever smell good? When the meat was cooked, he shared it between us. It was as if he'd known all along I was coming for dinner. You were wondering where I slept, right? You were hoping it would be down there by his feet, and you'd be right. For the first time since leaving home, I slept a genuine, all-out puppy sleep. The bells awoke me. The goats were restless, ready to hit the road. It was all they knew. Life was one long straight run of grass or no grass. Something to be said for the simplicity of that. I found a piece of the goat man's face to lick him awake. Whoa, Shep, you must be hungry, huh, fella? He pushed the door of the wagon house open. I hopped out and did my business. We had our breakfast, milk for me, cheese and milk for him. Then we began moving again. Early. It wasn't so bad. A few cars. The air still smelling like it was meant to. After a while, I didn't know which was worse, the goats or the cars. If I hadn't loved the goat man so much, I don't think I could have hung on as long as I did. A long time in people years, even longer in dog years. Why we stuck to the highway was a mystery to me. All that exhaust and the smell of burned rubber when he could have gone up into the hills. After I got to know the goat man better, I began to figure it out. The highway was just part of the bigger thing he believed in, his place on earth. Never asked for a thing, the goat man. I never once saw him reach his hand out for someone else's money. It would never have occurred to him to beg. He had all he needed. Goat's milk and the cheese he made from it, some goat's meat now and then, and his wisdom. Cropping the grass wherever it grew was the goat's man's purpose. His payments for the little space on earth he and the goats took up. The circle of life, he called it. Most nights, after we'd stopped and had our dinners while the goats grazed, the goat man would get to work on what he called his words of wisdom cards. Now that's a good one, he'd say, scratching his chin somewhere under all that beard. Listen to this one, Shep. I'd cock my head and he'd read me what he wrote. I guessed it was wisdom, though I really didn't know. Most cards he decorated with pictures. Well, I mean, sort of pictures. He was better with words. When he was finished, he put a rubber band around the cards. Wisdom, he said with that little wink he always gave me. That's what people need right now, and I'm just the person to give them some. Well, me and President Eisenhower. Then he'd curl up under his pile of quilts, and in no time at all he'd be snoring. It wasn't an exciting life. I had a higher calling and I knew it, but I loved the goat man. He taught me all I knew. Not about the sheep, Dad and old Dex taught me that, but about philosophy, which is just a big word for big ideas, like what things mean and how to live the best life. Trouble was, sometimes the philosophy would happen at the very worst times, when I was tired and hungry and had to whine a little to get the goat man's attention. Like once after a real long day when we were camped for the night and the goat man was fixing our dinner, he'd put some goat's meat on to cook, and my nose was as close to that meat as it could be without setting my fur on fire. Shep, the goat man said, and I knew by the sound of his voice that the philosophy was coming. You will journey far and wide if you make your sails of patience. See what I mean? Sails of patience? It took some doing to understand the goat man's meaning sometimes, and by then the meat was ready. Worse was when the goat man came up with something so good he'd have to write it on a card right then. Our meat would shrink to nothing and turn black as coal. The goat man would always be sorry he'd ruined our dinner, but not for long. Don't cry over spilled goat's milk, he'd say, chuckling to himself. I never did get it.